Welcome to the Mid-America PTTC podcast, where we are a community of change leaders and prevention catalysts that strive to empower individuals and communities to promote safe, healthy, and drug-free communities across our region. We're honored to have you as a member of our PTTC community. Thanks for listening and keep up the great work.
Every single one of us is a leader and could be a leader.
It started with a local coalition in our county.
Strategies you know, but stories you don't.
Data is the currency of prevention.
We want to reduce the negative and we want to promote the positive.
Collaboration is the only way to move the prevention needle.
About connecting the research with the practitioner.
Put something out there that was kind of off the wall and create a community of prevention.
It's a passion, it's a real love to try to help make our world a little bit better, a little bit happier, small pieces at a time.
It's said an overnight success takes 16 years.
If we didn't plan for the change, but if we didn't help orchestrate it, then change is going to be upon us.
When it comes to the spiff, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Because the real power is in the process.
Ultimately, all of us want success in the work we're doing. We don't want to do mindless work. Proactive, participatory planning promotes positive, preventive progress.
This is the Mid-America PTTC podcast. I'm your host, Dave Clausen, and I am the director of the Mid-America Prevention Technology Transfer Center. Our guest is Officer Ryan Snow. Ryan serves full-time as a police officer with a large university police department where he educates the community about DUI and drug-related issues. He is a certified drug recognition expert instructor and has completed hundreds of hours of training related to drugs and the impacts they have on the human body. As a police officer, Ryan has firsthand knowledge of the dangers that drugs bring to communities. He has spoken at numerous national and state conferences on topics related to drugs, and he has also developed training opportunities for campuses and delivered those classes at colleges and universities across the nation. Ryan's work has been featured in webinars, newspapers, television, and educational articles. And prior to law enforcement, Ryan graduated with a bachelor's degree in education and a master's degree in educational administration. Now, before we get into the content, we'd like to thank our funder, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration. And a quick note, although funded by SAMHSA, the contents of this recording does not necessarily reflect the views of SAMHSA. Without further ado, let's get into the content. All right, I'd like to welcome Ryan Snow to the podcast. Ryan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
During my introduction, I mentioned that you are a drug recognition expert, or DRE. Would you mind sharing what all that entails?
Yeah, sure. Back in 2013, I put in a request to go to the drug recognition expert school or training. I was extremely lucky to be granted that opportunity. I went out to classroom training, a 2-week period of time, and then moved from that and did some evaluations on individuals that were actually under the influence of some type of drug. And the training basically trains you to be able to identify different signs and symptoms within somebody that's ingested a drug and be able to identify what type of drug that they've ingested or what category of drug they've ingested. So I may not be able to tell you that somebody has been doing cocaine, but I would be able to identify that they were under some type of a stimulant. And I kind of have come up with my own way of referring to the DRE school as kind of the PhD of training when it comes to impaired driving, because when officers are hired during the academy, they'll attend the 24-hour NHTSA training, so the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration training. It's a 24-hour program that we teach all officers in the academy to help them identify when somebody is too impaired to be driving. But most of that focuses on alcohol, and when they get out, they have the opportunity to take a class called A-Ride, which is the Advanced Roadside Impaired Driving Enforcement class. And that's a 16-hour class, 2-day class, to give them a better idea of identifying people that are impaired based not only on alcohol, but also drugs as well. And so it's kind of a crash course for identifying when somebody may be under the influence of some type of a drug and how to kind of go about that process. I kind of refer to that. So the 24-hour class would be like your bachelor's degree of impaired driving. The A-Ride class would kind of be like your master's degree of impaired driving. And then the DRE school is basically the PhD, where we really break down all the different drugs, signs and symptoms, how they impact the body, and things like that, so we can give officers a really good idea of how to process if they come across somebody that's impaired by, a type of drug.
Wonderful, wonderful. And really, on top of that PhD, you're also a DRE instructor. So what does that mean?
Yeah, so a couple years back, actually, I was approached by the DRE coordinator and asked if I wanted to take part in the instructor program, and I absolutely accepted that opportunity. And so now I'm one of the instructors that will actually teach the new DREs as they sign up to go through the course. I will travel to wherever the course is and teach some blocks or segments on the different drugs and how they impact the human body and what kind of changes you'll see and that type of thing. And I also will assist them as they go through their process where they have to do evaluations on individuals that are actually under the influence of some type of a drug, and I'll stand there and kind of help them through that process. These are their first kind of introduction to doing the evaluation on an actual person, and so I'm there to kind of coach them along to that process and come up with the correct decision based on what they're seeing.
A wealth of knowledge and experience. Can't wait to dive into our episodes and learn more about some of the current drug trends. So I was listening to the DEA's Campus Drug Prevention podcast, actually when you, Ryan, were a guest on it, and you had shared a very personal story involving inhalants. And rather than rehash that story here, do you have any other stories? Where have you seen inhalants on duty?
So inhalants are a kind of a big thing, especially on or around college campuses, because they're often used in like the club party scene type of an arena. And obviously a lot of people come to college and they think that is their ability to go out there and try new things and get involved in things that they'll never do again in their life. And I agree with that when it comes to like fun things and things that aren't illegal, but I think it's important to remember and to kind of share with students or people of that age that they can still have fun in college without experimenting with drugs in particular. But inhalants is something that I see pretty commonly. Most of the time I'm seeing it in one of two areas. The first one being nitrous oxide canisters. So if you go to the store and you have a canister that you would create like whipped cream with or homemade whipped cream, they sell the little nitrous oxide canisters to be able to propel that and put the air into, or the chemical into it to make it the whipped cream. Those things can actually be broken open with something called a cracker that cracks it open, and it's able to expel the gas, or the gas escapes from it. So the nitrous oxide then escapes from the canister, and a lot of times they'll put it into like a balloon or something else. Then they tie that balloon off, and they'll, the dealer of the drug will either sell the balloon, or they'll get a sale for the actual nitrous oxide in itself, and they'll give them the canister or whatever, and then just say, find me when you want to use it and you can crack it and things like that. But I've seen it that way with the nitrous oxide, but I also see it with the dust off cans. So it's like the keyboard cleaner that you would spray the compressed air into the keyboard to clean off the dust. students are using that a lot to huff that in or inhale that. And it creates a very quick high. This is one of those drugs that I personally have never really understood why students or why individuals use this drug, because it is an extremely fast high. I've seen students, using this, and oftentimes, at least on college campuses and other public spaces, oftentimes there's cameras. And so the cameras can find the people we're looking for prior to, police or anybody else getting there. And we'll watch these people. We just had a recent case where an individual crack open and huff probably 15 to 20 nitrous oxide canisters, all in a row, immediately, one right after the other. And the reason being, they pop open these nitrous oxide canisters and they suck in the chemical inside, and it gives them an immediate high. I mean, it is virtually the moment it enters their mouth or their system, they're starting to feel it. And they feel that high for 30 seconds to a minute, and then it goes away. And they have to do another one and another one and another one. And that repetition, that just shows you how much of this stuff you actually have to use in order to feel the high, experience the high, I guess, before you just move on with your life, because it goes away almost immediately too. So that's always been the really confusing part for me, is why anybody would do this. But with its availability, you can pretty much find it at any store, whether you're looking for the nitrous oxide canisters or you're looking for the dust off. You can also, inhalants include lots of different substances. So you can inhale paint or glue, things like that. Oftentimes with the paint, they'll use a gold or a silver paint because it has the highest concentration of the chemical that they're looking for, the toluene. And they'll spray that paint into a can or something that would kind of contain it. And then it creates just that small hole, like in the top of a can, like a Coke can, so in the top of the Coke can, it creates just that small hole where that substance, that gas, can escape. So they put their mouth over that and breathe that in, and that's what gives them the high. With that, you get to see some idea of, signs and symptoms of ingestion, such as they'll actually have the substance around their face. So you may actually see a gold or a silver paint-like substance around their nose or their mouth. And that shows you right there, hey, they're probably huffing a paint. But it's extremely common, what I've seen in the college atmosphere, that age around that, the party scene, because it is a legal substance and you can get it most anywhere.
What's interesting with a couple of our other episodes that we've done, these substances are legal. They have a purpose, and it's more when they are misused that they're causing these dangers and the trouble. Talking about seeing it on a college campus, do you have a story about when you contacted a student that had been using or using inhalants? If so, what did those conversations go like?
So I actually had an instance where an individual pulled into a parking lot and was seen by one of the officers sitting in a parked car in a parking lot really no one really should be in. And it was kind of hey, this is kind of weird. And when he walked up, the guy was actually huffing through or inhaling a substance through a whipped cream canister, which we later obviously found out was the nitrous oxide. And they called me to the scene because I have, the special training to kind of go along with being too impaired to drive and being impaired on a substance like that outside of alcohol. So they called me to the scene, and I got there and started talking to this individual, and he was an Asian male, so international student, had come from China and was having lots of stress, anxiety built around doing well in school. And he found that using an inhalant was a way to escape the reality for a very short period of time. And it was almost like he almost saw it as like a recharge for him. So he would go out and he would buy big box canisters of these nitrous oxide canisters and basically run right through them. So he would inhale every canister he had in a super short period of time, escape the reality of where he was at for a couple hours, and then he would go back and get back into what he was doing. So studying or, just completing homework or whatever. And he said that it was probably the easiest way to quickly escape what he was feeling without bringing any kind of attention to himself, in the sense that he could go in a store and buy these boxes of nitrous canisters without it being illegal. And so when I started talking to him about that aspect, it was really interesting because he said that, because he was from overseas, he was from China, and he was scared to use any drugs that would be considered an illegal drug. So he didn't want to go out and buy like a pill or, some other substance like cannabis or something like that that would be seen as a naturally illegal substance within our system or our state. But the nitrous oxide allowed him to purchase something legally and then ended up using it illegally to get the effects of the drug. And he kind of saw that as almost like a gray area. Now, for me, it wasn't a gray area. It was an illegal, he was using a legal substance and introducing it into his body, making it illegal. But I mean, as we were going through his car, we were finding upwards of 500 little canisters of the nitrous oxide. And when I began asking him how many he was using at a single time, he was saying anywhere from about 50 to 100 of these canisters at on a single night. So he was going in purchasing these. And my immediate question was, what store are you buying these from? And why are the people at that store not recognizing the fact that you, as a college student, probably don't need 100 nitrous oxide canisters? You are not making that much whipped cream in your apartment. It's just not possible. And so, I was pretty shocked by that.
Yes, I'm still kind of shocked processing that. That's just hard to imagine. You talked about the very quick high that comes from this, 30 seconds, and how this student found it as sort of an escape from the pressure and the stress he was feeling. Well, could you tell us a little bit more about the actual effects in that short 30-second window?
Yeah, so when you take something like this into your system, a lot of times you can lose consciousness. I mean, you'll just pass out essentially, because you're depriving your brain of the oxygen that it needs when you're breathing in or inhaling all of that nitrous oxide. It's different from that. So you'll actually lose the consciousness momentarily. But you'll see a lot of like bloodshot eyes and confusion. They'll be extremely disoriented usually, because it completely, messes up the senses of the body. And so it's gone there. A lot of times you'll see a flushed face. Like I said, you might have the odor of the substance. So maybe a paint odor or like a chemical odor coming from their breath at the time. You may also see some type of a residue of the substance. Again, back to the paint. Watery eyes, a thick slurred speech can come with this. But all of that will generally dissipate over time. And that's why when we're talking about an impaired driving circumstance with this type of a drug, it's extremely hard to, get there in time, because a lot of times this will come from a crash, right? So somebody will be driving down the road. They'll decide to try to, take in a canister of nitrous oxide or inhalant, maybe dust off, and they'll lose consciousness. So they'll actually crash. So then that takes time. So you have the crash that occurs, somebody viewing the crash, somebody calling into 911, 911 then dispatching the officers. The officers, obviously take a couple minutes to arrive. Once they arrive and they assess the scene, the first thing they're doing is they're looking for injuries. They're looking for, things that they need immediately to do. once an officer kind of understands, hey, this might actually be due to some type of impairment from inhalant, then they may not have the specialized training that goes along with that. So they may even call in a DRE or somebody that's, more specially trained in drug impairment. So that takes time for that officer to get there. And once that officer gets there, then they have to go through the protocol to actually do the testing. So, I mean, we're talking 15, 20, 30 minutes at times. And if you live in an area where maybe your closest DRE is at a county or a state, agency, and so they have to come in from farther away, you're talking even longer than that. And when we look at the effects of this type of a drug, it's so short that oftentimes, even if I was the first officer to arrive on that, even if I saw the crash happen and were able to get out with that individual and start the testing almost immediately, I may see pretty clear signs and symptoms as we start the testing, but by the end of the testing, which can take 5-10 minutes, I may see much less, as far as the outward signs of the drug use. And so that's when I have to start looking at other signs. So are there empty canisters or any empty cans of dust off or something like that, like laying around the car? Do they have a device like a cracker to actually break into those canisters and expel the gases from inside? Do they have something like that? Are there balloons? Are there empty balloons laying around? Because oftentimes that's how they, hold the gas until they're ready to inhale it at that point. But I also look for other things. So like on their clothes, specifically with dust off, the canisters gets extremely cold and will almost like frostbite onto your fingers or your lips. And so it'll turn lips blue. It'll kind of cold burn like fingers and things like that. And so what people will do is they'll use their shirts or their clothes, maybe a rag in the car, something like that, to kind of act as like a buffer between the actual can and their mouth or their body as they're going through. And so one of the things I've seen pretty commonly is they will develop basically like a frozen circle around their collar area, around the cuff of their, like a long sleeve shirt or something like that. And that's from putting the canister through that shirt to kind of act as that buffer to not freeze them so bad. And so if I see any kind of like a burn mark or a cold mark on their shirt, I always like to, say, hey, now I can see what you've been doing, and kind of go down that path and kind of get into a little bit more of the drug, why they use the drug, what leads them to the drug, that type of stuff. Because not only is that good for obviously like, prosecution of the crime type of a thing. If they hurt somebody in a DUI or something, we want to do everything we can to get all that evidence over to the courts. But I also want to dive into their lives a little bit and kind of understand why they're using the substance and like what are they doing, in their lives outside of this that can influence why they picked up this drug in the first place.
Yes, really get into the root causes. So then you can move towards having that conversation about change. I like it. Really, you unpacked a lot in this episode. What are the different types of inhalants? Some of the folks that you have seen choose to use inhalants, the effects, and you really give a fairly comprehensive list of different things to look for as far as signs or methods and tools of use. I'm kind of noticing a theme from our various episodes we've done, particularly around the substances that have a legal use and access. It sounds like to really notice things, pay attention, look for those just little details, whether it be those frost marks on the cuff or the big purchases, or you had referenced a bottle of NyQuil or Robitussin in a cup holder in a car, and just noticing those things and having a conversation and just asking. Any other sort of final, like just overall takeaways for our listeners?
I would just say in general, kind of to piggyback off of what you just said is, look for the little things. The little things can often mean the most to you when you're dealing with somebody that is using drugs or maybe using drugs. And so talking to them, I always tell, so I teach at the academy for newer officers as they're coming in. I teach them about DUI drugs and like just give them a brief intro of that, as well as a longer class that dives into current drug trends and what's popular and how people are using things. But I always say, ask, because you will be shocked at what people will tell you and how honest people will be about what they're doing if you just ask. But a lot of people are so scared to just ask those questions because they're like, shoot, they'll never tell me this answer. They'll never give me this information because it's about drugs. It's about something that they know they're doing is bad. And I find it more often that people may know what they're doing is the wrong thing, but they're also willing to share with you much more than you might expect. So ask them those questions, show them that you actually are trying to help them and that you really truly do care for them. You want to see them succeed, and building that rapport with them may lead you into a much better conversation.
Yes, indeed. And not just a conversation for that particular case, but a conversation about creating that long-term change and truly making a difference in somebody's life. It speaks directly to your heart and your approach. I definitely encourage everyone to listen to Ryan's interview with the DEA's podcast for campus drug prevention. Shares a very, very good personal story where simply asking a question really created that conversation for change in a student's life. But I don't want to give any spoilers there, but it's definitely a good one. Thank you again, Ryan, for doing what you do and also sharing it with everybody. We greatly appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.